Okay, take two on this one. I've realized I started recording and I forgot to plug in the mic, so here we go the second time. So, we talked about this already, where textiles came out. That was going to be the first area we're going to industrialize. Gives to the growth of factories. Cool. So now we have these new factory towns developing. People are leaving their houses, going to these new towns. Slums, we'll talk about those later. Slums are starting to develop around these new towns, and whole new population centers are developing. Also, the new food increases led to new populations in general. So what could go wrong? Another cause and effect chain, more causality. That's basically this entire chapter. So next big cause and effect chain. England's population was booming. England, because of food crops, because of all these industrial changes, started to see big population growth. So England's population was growing, and randomly enough, I guess, people didn't like freezing to death in the wintertime. So no problem, just chop down trees. For most of human history, this is how we would heat our homes. You would go out into the wooded areas by your house, especially in Europe, there are a lot of wooded areas. You would go out, chop down a tree, let the tree dry out essentially over a year, chop it into firewood, and then you would stack that firewood, and you would have ability to heat your home for the rest of the for the winter months. And you would do that obviously probably more in one tree. Okay, so no problem, just have people chop down trees. Well, as population started to grow, and as new cities started to develop in different places in England with new demands for firewood, we started to run into problems. Basically, England starts running out of trees, and there's still trees in England. Don't get me wrong, but we started to see around population centers it was harder to get trees. How far do you want to drag your firewood to your house? This is before cars, before trains, before trucks. You would have to do a lot of this by hand. Maybe you were wealthy enough or lucky enough to have animals, but a lot of this would have been done by hand. So they're running out of trees. So you go out a mile, you go out 5 miles, and then eventually you're like, this is ridiculous. I can't go that far. So no problem, right? For every problem, there's a solution. Let's come up with the next solution. Coal. Now we've used coal as a species for a long time. We've known about it. The Chinese, almost 1,000 years before this, were using it for early steel production, even turning it into coke. And we'll talk about that later. But we have known about coal for a long time. Coal is essentially like trees. It's just a tree has to sit and dry out for a year before you can burn it. And if you've ever been camping and tried to burn green plant matter or wet plant matter, it's smoky, it doesn't burn really well. Well, if you could squeeze out more and more of that moisture, if you could squeeze out more and more water out of the plant matter, out of the trees, it becomes more efficient at burning, just like a dry piece of firewood. Well, we actually see this happen. You can have plant matter, you can burn it. As you squeeze out some of the moisture, it starts getting caked together, it turns into peat. It's not quite the same, but if you've ever raked leaves to your curb and let them sit all winter and then gone back the next spring and tried to scrape them up, they kind of are matted together and rotted together a little bit. That's kind of similar. It's getting towards these phases here with peat, that sort of idea. But eventually it goes through different phases as more and more moisture is squeezed out, and it becomes a very hard rock that is essentially a hydrocarbon. It's a burnable power source that used to be plants. Just squeezed out all the moisture over time. We've known about coal for a long time. We've used coal for a long time, but the problem was, why weren't we using coal from the beginning? Well, it's black, sooty. When it burns, it kind of gives off a lot of pollution. It's not great. You wouldn't want to have it in your house typically. Not that firewood's 100% perfect, but it's if you've ever, don't burn coal in your house, but it's dirtier and stuff like that. And the other problem is it's in the ground. Trees grow above ground. You can chop it down, let it sit there, and then chop it into firewood. You don't have to go underneath the ground. Coal mining is going to be way more labor intensive. It's going to require more people, but you can get a lot of power. You can get a lot of coal out of the ground as long as you can organize your labor and get people to dig it out. It is more dangerous. This is before they had lights too, so you would have to do a lot with candlelight. You're in a dark, cold pit, in the ground, which is not how I want to work. So people start mining coal to use instead as a viable power source. It doesn't disappear as quickly as the trees, and there was a lot of it in England, at least at first. So they start digging coal out of the ground. Problem solved, right? Well, it seems like all of these things, we solve one problem, makes another one. So we start digging coal out of the ground. So they get this coal out of the ground, and they keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And if you've ever dug a hole in your backyard or gone to the beach and dug down like a foot, you've probably realized that eventually water will start filling in, like a well. That's how wells work. right? You dig down into the water table, the ground is like a sponge, it absorbs all the water. Well, if you dig into the ground, eventually water will start seeping in and the coal mine will start flooding. Just like if you dug a hole in your backyard, you dig down a few feet, eventually it's probably going to be soupy water. If you dig in a foot down at the beach, it's going to fill with water. It's the same idea. So the coal mines start flooding. They start flooding with water just from the groundwater. Okay, no problem. Just use a pump. Right? We've had pump technology for a long time. Wooden sailing ships have used pumps for a long time. Water wells, hand cranked water wells, have been around for a long time. So we had pumping technology. But the problem was they were human powered pumping technology. Very simple pumps that would require you to do a lot of hard physical labor. And this was not a job that you could just do for, 6 hours or whatever, 8 hours, 12 hours, 14 hours while they're actually mining coal that day. It would have to be done pretty much 24/7, because if you stop pumping, if you stop that pump, eventually the water is going to keep coming in and keep flooding in, and eventually the whole mine's going to flood, and it's going to be a lot harder to get that water out, by this time of the start of the next shift. So people are going to have to be in the dark, nasty, cold coal mines digging out or pumping out water constantly. That's a lot of work. So pumping was hard work. So started with trees, got to coal, now we're at water pumps, and now we're at a problem of it's hard work. But don't worry, remember Jethro Tull showed us that there's machinery out there, that we can use machines to make lives better. So let's make a better machine. Water pumps. I'm not going to belabor this point too much, but basically they make mechanical water pumps. So now, instead of having to use human labor, you can use a pump that is basically, mechanized. It's an automatic one. So now, we have we had a problem, we had a need, we had a necessity. We created a new form of pumping water. Easy, problem solved. But is it? Remember, we're talking the early industrial age. The first power source that we were using for early machines was water. We were using water wheels. Water wheels require rivers. You need to have flowing water to go through and push the water wheel around to make the power source, to use that mechanical energy. Okay, so that's a problem now. How do we solve this problem? You're not going to build your coal mine in a river, so how are we going to solve this problem of powering these new mechanical pumps? Steam. So, machines need power to work. Water wheels only work really well near rivers. That's a problem now. And you're not going to build your coal mine in a river. So along comes James Watt. And he's not alone. There were other people who were involved in this process as well, too. But James Watt usually gets credit for it, and that's why we use watt as a unit of power. It's a unit you'll hear in your science classes. We use to measure amounts of power. Light bulbs are usually rated in lumens and watts. Watts are pretty important because of it. So James Watt's a pretty important guy. But anyways, steam power is going to be invented. So James Watt comes up with the idea, and I'm going to credit it to him because it's easier for our class. But James Watt comes up with the idea of saying, okay, we need to have a power source mainly for these pumps, but then eventually for everything else. We need to have a power source that is not reliant on flowing water on rivers. So what he does is basically comes up with the idea of steam generation. And there's going to be different variations, but the basic idea is you basically boil water. All right, you boil water, and that water will turn into steam. And steam has a lot of energy into it. If you get water boiling, right, water hits its boiling temperature and it stops. It doesn't go higher than that. You don't have like 400-degree liquid water, because what happens is it hits that point, and that energy that you're adding to it is converted into steam. There's a lot of steam, or a lot of power in steam. And be careful, if you've ever cooked or know somebody who's cooked, they'll talk about steam burns. Steam can hurt you a lot more than even boiling water, because it has a lot of energy into it, especially if it's concentrated. So he comes up with the idea, and this picture here is probably a little more complicated than we need, but he comes up with the idea of basically concentrating that steam energy and then siphoning it through a point, through a smaller place, giving it a way to release that steam energy. Now, if you didn't release the steam energy, if you closed off this area and just boiled the water, it would blow up. Obviously, steam power is without, it's not without dangers. But you basically get this water boiling. You get it to a super high temperature. You boil the water, get all that steam, and then, let's just make this more simplified. That steam can then push a turbine, basically a water wheel. All right? You basically push some turbine and it will move. Now, these are piston-powered ones, but the simpler ones, you basically just use that steam to push a turbine, and now it's basically a water wheel. The turbine's basically a wheel, just a water wheel. And so you use the steam to push the turbine, and now you have mechanical energy. And as long as you can boil water, as long as you have fire and water, you can have power anywhere. So basically, the steam engine uses steam, hot expanding vaporized water, to move something. It moves either a piston or a wheel. And this is going to change the world. Still to this day, all of our electrical energy, the devices that you're watching this video on right now, are powered in a weird way by steam. Steam and this technology, this idea, obviously improved, obviously more efficient, but this idea is basically what powers the world. Uh, Moving a turbine with boiling water. Today in Ohio, we use mostly coal and natural gas to make electricity from the same idea, but and we'll talk about how electricity is generated later. But the idea is we basically use steam to move something. Nuclear power, well, that's a big one, right? Everybody thinks that's really high tech, and it is, but it's basically just the fanciest, most expensive way of boiling water. James Watt's idea of boiling water and creating a steam engine is going to change everything. Now, as long as you can boil water, put some wheels on that, right? Now you've got a train. As long as you can boil water, you can have a factory anywhere. You don't need to build next to rivers anymore. You can have factories and machinery anywhere. And so the machines, and they start to spread just everywhere. Now inventors aren't stuck with rivers and not just stuck working in certain areas and using water in rivers for these things. Now you can have machinery anywhere, and so people are going to use them everywhere. Pretty much everything will be made into machinery. Anything that be more efficient will be. One of the most famous early inventions is Eli Whitney's cotton gin, which will speed up and clean the process of making cotton. Basically, you dump in raw material and it basically shreds it, pulls out all the seeds, and will give you a more clean final product. This is going to be a big game changer. Downfall of the cotton gin is it also made slavery more efficient and more cost effective. And you're going to learn about that next year when you take APUS. The cotton gin is usually associated with the rise of slavery in the United States of America and the giant boom of it. So that's kind of a detractor on there. But you'll learn more about that next year in APUS. And that's where we'll stop for this video.